Hello, my name's Matthew and welcome to the second of our short digital tours looking at the exhibition Australian Dreams Picturing Our Built World. An exhibition that looks at how artists, photographers and printmakers have represented Australia's built environment. Today we're going to look at modernism. Modernism was a collection of ideas that rejected the styles of the past and was a response, I guess, to the massive social, economic and technological changes happening in the world around the 30s, 40s and 50s. Modernist photography, I guess, if you look for some stylistic indicators, you'd see it was focused on abstraction. There was a dynamic interplay of diagonal and horizontal lines. They also had very sharply delineated forms, and there was severe contrast between light and shade. One of the greatest modernist photographers in Australia was Olive Cotton, and her work actually straddles some of the earlier work we saw last week, the Casno style of misty streetscapes, but she also had that modernist kind of aesthetic as well, where she looked at line, shape, form, black and white. Now let's go and have a look at Max Dupain's work. Max Dupain was the most famous and influential Australian modernist photographer. He's really well known for his documentary work, his slices of Australian life, but from the 1950s onwards he became more and more focused on architectural photography, and he worked with a lot of the great architects in Australian history, including, particularly Harry Seidler. I like this portrait of a lamppost, which is just near the corner of Park Street and George Street. I think it's a wonderful image. But I'm also very fond of his images of the Sydney Opera House, although this one's particularly dark, so you might need to go to Trove, where every image that we've seen in both our tours is available to view online. Now let's go and have another look, or a look at another image of the Sydney Opera House. So Dupain's image shows the Opera House cloaked in darkness. This image of the Opera House by David Moore shows it shimmering in the sunlight. This other image by David Moore, who was one of the biggest architectural photographers in Sydney, is almost a surrealist nightmare of the Surrey Hills street that it's depicting. Mark Strizic was one of the more famous architectural photographers working in Melbourne. I love the way that his pictures of well-known buildings use people to animate the composition, like this particular one of the Shrine of Remembrance and this one here of Flinders Street Station. And I particularly like this last image here of this chap pensively looking out from his terrace in East Melbourne. Now let's go and look at some Wolfgang Sievers pictures. Wolfgang Sievers was one of the leading architectural and industrial photographers in Australia. He worked with a lot of Melbourne's most well-known architects and documented a lot of Melbourne's most significant houses. His work is a celebration of light, angles and shape. And I particularly like the way when you put four of his works together, they seem to rhyme visually, I guess. Now, let's fast forward to the 2000s. And things look very different now. Colour photography is in vogue. These large format pictures dominate architectural magazines. And the most prominent architectural photographer working in Australia since the 1980s has been John Gollings, and this is one of Gollings' work. I'm particularly interested in this work. It's a building by McBride Charles Bryan that won the World Festival of Architecture Award in 2009 for Best House. It's based on a mathematical principle where one line has no inside, outside, upside or downside. I don't understand it, but I thought it was a very interesting idea to start with when you're designing a house. Now let's go and look in the next room. So now I'm in the next room in front of a work by Martin Mischkolnig, which is, like the Gollings work, very colourful. It's a beautiful print, but it's a very different building that you can see in this picture, or a couple of buildings. What I like, I think in this room we've tried to have pictures of buildings that are a lot more humble and ordinary and everyday, and I think they're no less interesting for that fact. And I also like this image because it's a portrait of a place and these two people here. And we've got another such portrait mixed with buildings on this wall by the photographer Ruth Maddison, who spent the last 20 years documenting the people of Eden, and this is a picture of what I assume is a mother and daughter in front of their house in Eden. This picture is also by Madison. I like, it's a shack somewhere in Broadmeadows railway station, and I like it that, I'm not sure if this shack is unloved I should say, and graffitied by vandals, or you could say that it's loved very much, and that the vandals have seen this as a canvas to express their hopes and dreams and their innermost thoughts on. Now, the built environment can also be used as a jungle gym. And I love this picture by Maggie Diaz, and Diaz was a well-known freelance photographer in Melbourne, but she also had a real talent or flair for capturing people in the city. And what I love about these series of images is that they show that the built environment can be used in a lot of different ways, which, yeah, that's why I like them. Now let's go and have a look at some pictures on this wall. So this particular work is by the photographer John Rhodes, and he's interested in documenting sites that have evidence of Indigenous occupation. So what I think is very interesting about these series of images is that we start out with a very simple, straightforward suburban house in Tuggeranong, and then gradually, as his angle shifts, a scar is revealed on the tree. So this is the scar tree that was obviously used by the Ngunnawal people to source timber. So we're going to finish up today looking at the work of freelance photojournalist Jeff Carter. Carter described himself as a photographer of the poor and the unknown, and this work here is of a terrace in Ultimo in Sydney. And I think it's quite interesting because it makes me think about life cycles, not just of people. This girl is at the beginning of her life, but it also makes me think about the life cycle of buildings, that they get built, but they don't necessarily last forever. This is another work from Ultimo, and what I like about Carter's work is that it feels like, you know, a lot of it feels like a film still, like it's part of a broader narrative. And the first time I looked at this particular picture, I spent a lot of time wondering where this guy was going to, and I decided he was off to the pub for a schooner and a bet. And here's another picture about life cycles. Well, I think it's about life cycles, but maybe I've been looking at pictures of buildings for too long. I like the fact that you have this older chap walking out a frame here, and you have these two younger people looking out towards the horizon, and all these little beach box houses, which you see commonly along Port Phillip Bay, they seem to me like different options you can take in your life, different doorways you can go through. Anyway, maybe I've been looking at pictures of buildings for too long, but that's how I read it. Thanks for joining us today, and I hope you enjoyed the talk, and we'll see you next time.